We'd been walking for 2 days, and my legs felt numb, like blocks of wood. My knees wobbled and shook. My feet were blistered and aching. And there was no end in sight to the miles of abandoned wasteland all around us. Collapsed barns and farmhouses left in disrepair. Shutters hanging off their hinges, banging in the wind. But at least there weren't many zombies. That was a nice change of pace from the city, where I'd recently been sent on a mission.
Why'd that damn helicopter have to go down out here in the middle of nowhere?
Ben was asking, after shaking the last few drops of water from the canteen.
Couldn't have crashed on a nice beach somewhere? You know, we could just sit back, drink rum from coconuts, and chill, waiting to be rescued.
Man, ain't no coconuts around here, that's for sure. Definitely no rum. We need water, though, and soon. It'll be dark out in an hour or two. Let's hit this next farmhouse, see what we can find. We went up the next long gravel driveway, heading towards a 2-story farmhouse surrounded by overgrown fields. The surrounding plant life had taken over parts of the house. It was being reclaimed by overgrown brush. Creeping vines and a giant, sagging willow tree stood out front, concealing its features like a funeral veil.
Let's check inside. Maybe the taps still work.
The houses around here were too far from the city to be on a municipal water supply. They all had indoor plumbing hooked straight into wells which fed off the groundwater. These systems used pumps which relied on electricity to function, but most had a 10 to 50 gallon reservoir. As long as it hadn't been completely depleted, it would still be usable. Hopefully this house would give us the crucial hydration we needed, and maybe a few other supplies too. Front or back? I asked. I picked last time.
Let's go in the back. I always was an ass man.
You're an ass, that's what you are. But okay, you got it, ass man. Back door it is. The gravel driveway crunched beneath our feet as we crept around to the rear of the old farmhouse. It was quiet inside, at least. That was a good sign. Ghouls tended to perk up at the sounds of nearby movement, and despite our best efforts, it was impossible to stay completely silent while moving. Especially for me, a 6.5-foot tall galoot. I tripped over a garbage can as we rounded the corner at the back of the house, as if to emphasize this point. The ruckus it stirred up was painfully loud in the dead silence of the rural landscape. I noticed that no birds were chirping. There were no squirrels or mice to be seen anywhere. This place had been completely abandoned by the world. I think we're okay, I said, regaining my balance and looking around nervously. If there were any ghouls around here, we'd have seen them by now.
Famous last words, Ben said, scowling. If there were any of them within a mile, they're headed this way now.
I looked at my feet and apologized. I'd always been clumsy. If it got me killed, I could live with that. But I couldn't bear the thought of someone else dying because of my idiocy. We broke down the back door of the house, kicking it in and destroying the lock in the process. The old wooden door was splintered down the side and wouldn't stay closed, so we pushed a piece of heavy furniture in front of it to provide some security. The wardrobe was large and strong, and looked capable of preventing a handful of zombies from entering. It would last about 2 seconds against a horde, though, and those could come through at any time. Like a tornado with no warning siren, except the rumble of 100,000 feet shuffling toward you, as your heart races and you see that there's no escape from...
Hey, are you with me?
Ben asked, grabbing my arm and looking concerned.
I need you here, in the present. Not back there.
Sorry, I shook my head. I'm back.
Good.
Next, we set about clearing the farmhouse. The last thing you want is to get surprised by lurking household zombies when you pick a place to crash for the night. It's best to deal with these things right away. A stitch in time saves 9, as they say. But stitches don't do shit for zombie bites anyways. In reality, by this point in the zombie apocalypse, the most terrifying prospect was no longer the idea of stumbling across a zombie in one of these closed rooms in this abandoned farmhouse, but the idea of finding a living person. Someone lying in wait. We knew what zombies would do, and to a certain extent they were predictable. They see you, they try to eat you. We cut off their heads, blow their brains out, and repeat. Over and over and over again. People are far less predictable. Where a zombie will make noise at your approach, clumsy and stupid, a person will wait quietly in the shadows. They may act as a friend, claiming to be hurt or innocent, just searching for a party to join, And we do look for those types of survivors. But they might also be pretending, waiting for you to turn your back before cutting your throat, right after shaking your hand and becoming an ally. We'd seen it all before, so we weren't as trusting these days. The house was dark, all of the curtains drawn. We both pulled out our flashlights and began to move from the back door in the kitchen towards the front of the house and what appeared to be the living room. Wooden floorboards creaked beneath our boots as we stepped carefully into the next room. There was no indication of recent life here, and I guessed that the owners had been gone for quite some time. The front foyer was similarly empty, as was the bathroom and a small sewing room and office on the main level. Despite the quiet and the appearance of long abandonment, the house felt lived in. It was a sensation that we weren't entirely alone there, but the source of that sensation was one I couldn't place. Still, I knew better than to ignore that feeling. "My spidey sense is tingling," I said to Ben. "Stay frosty."
"Shit," he muttered. "Alright, thanks for the heads up."
He knew I had a sixth sense for these things. We crept up the stairs to the second floor, keeping our voices low and our weapons ready. I carried a razor-sharp machete, while Ben had a small hand axe and wore a katana, a Japanese antique he'd found in a pawn shop. He'd had it strapped to his back for as long as I could remember.
"Anything?" he asked.
"I don't hear a peep. Could be a sleeper, though."
"Okay, right side first."
He kicked in the door to the right at the top of the stairs. Dark and empty. A boy's bedroom. There were 3 others. A master bedroom, a bathroom, and one more smaller bedroom which looked like it had once belonged to a young girl. The walls were painted powder pink, and there were posters and drawings of horses and rainbows, castles and fairy princesses adorning the walls. But all of these rooms were empty. An eerie tinkling sound came from outside, as the wind chime on the front porch was blown in the breeze. I shuddered, thinking of what else might have caused its sudden movement. Things other than the wind.
"Basement?"
"Gotta check. Who knows, maybe I'm losing it. Maybe we're in the clear and I'm just getting paranoid." Ben's face told me he wished that were true, but previous experience suggested otherwise. The 2 of us went back down to the main level and stood in front of the door leading to the basement. I put my ear to the wood and waited, listening. It was quiet and still as far as I could tell, but something told me we weren't alone in this place. I felt almost as if I was being watched. I held up my left hand and counted down on my fingers. 3, 2, 1, go, I whispered. Pushing open the door, I cast the beam of flashlight down into the darkness. Dust motes hovered and danced in the air before us. Taking a hesitant step, I began to descend. The stairs groaned and creaked loudly beneath my feet, and I winced with each step as the old wood bent with my weight. Once at the bottom, I cast the flashlight beam around to survey the cement-floored basement. It was cluttered with junk. Electronics, toys, and stacked boxes. There were cases of empty beer bottles and heaped piles of moldy clothing. A rat scurried past our feet, ducking beneath the stairs and disappearing into a gap that looked far too narrow for its girth.
"I hate rats," Ben muttered. "It stinks down here. Let's check this dump out quickly and get back upstairs."
"Quick but careful, okay? I still got the feeling."
"Would you relax? It's empty. Nobody pitches a perfect game every time, dude. It's alright if you're wrong every once in a while."
Ben was ambling into the darker section of the basement, with his hands held outwards like a showman, when he stopped speaking abruptly.
"What?"
A dark shape suddenly appeared from nowhere. It pounced, appearing from the shadows like a jaguar that had been lying in wait for its meal. Ben's screams rose higher and higher as he thrashed and pushed at the scrawny girl attacking him. He stuck out his hands defensively, and 2 of his fingers were quickly bitten off. Then, while he was distracted, the kid jumped up on his back and began to choke him with her legs in a triangle hold while tearing at his face with her nails. Eventually, he toppled to the floor, his face turning blue from lack of air. Despite the size difference, the feral nature of the teenage girl was too much for him to handle. She was like a cornered rat, biting and scratching at him viciously. I shone my flashlight, moving towards him from the other end of the basement, but all I could see at first was a blur of movement, and blood being sprayed and splashed in the air. As I got closer, I saw what looked to be a young girl, moving animalistically and dressed in tattered pink rags that might once have been her pajamas. Her hair was black and matted, greasy and covering her features as she tore apart my friend. Ben's cries for help turned to gurgling croaks and crackling wheezes as he began to choke on his own blood. A dark puddle spread across the floor, pooling around my feet as I slowly approached and drew closer. As I held up my machete with a trembling hand, I prepared to swing it at the girl's head. She may not have been a zombie, but she sure did act like one. Hunger changes people. I'd seen it before, and more than once. It makes them desperate, turns them into animals of instinct and need. Dead rat carcasses littered the floor, many of them half-eaten with the remaining flesh mummified. Others were just the heads and tails with skeletal remains attached in between, like a drumstick picked clean. "What's your name, little girl?" I asked, my voice trembling, lowering my weapon and hoping she had some morsel of humanity left in her. Her eyes glanced up from my friend's bloody, gasping body, then back down again a moment later. Her fingernails were several inches long, resembling talons. "My name's Henry. Looks like you've been down here by yourself for a long time. Where'd your parents go?" Again, she looked up at me for a split second before staring again at the body beneath her. Ben gurgled once more, and his eyes rolled back. I couldn't tell if he was breathing anymore, but it didn't look like he was. "Listen, I know this isn't you. I can get you some help. What's your name?" She spoke softly. "Julia?" "Well, Julia, that's my friend Ben you just killed. Now I know you're hungry, but we don't eat people, okay?" She growled like a dog whose bone was being taken away. None of that. Now if you can behave yourself, I'll let you come back to Egor with me. We can get you some real food. But you can't be doing this sort of thing, okay? No eating people. We're not zombies, we're better than that." "Egor? Really? You're part of Egor?" She thought about it for another moment before nodding reluctantly, and I stuck out my hand for her to take. After a moment's hesitation, she stood up on shaking legs and walked over to me. Then she took my hand and I led her up the stairs, away from the madness of the basement. "It's gonna be a while till the rescue chopper shows up. How would you like to hear a story while we wait?" The girl nodded. "My dad used to tell me stories, before the zombies got him." "How would you like to hear the story of how this whole mess got started, huh? The beginning of the whole zombie apocalypse?" "Nah. Do you know the one about the princess?" "Oh, come on. This one's actually really good. I bet you haven't heard it before. And I'll tell you some other ones after that, too, if we're still waiting." "I'm gonna close my eyes. Don't wake me up if I fall asleep, okay?" Julia said politely. "But yeah, go ahead with your stories, I guess." "Okay," I began. "This is the story of how the zombie apocalypse began. And then a few other cool stories about Egor killing zombies and stuff." I think Julia was already asleep, but I told her anyways. I've always liked telling stories. When Blake first came to me and told me what he wanted to do, I thought he'd lost his mind. Nobody robs a casino in real life. Not unless they want to go to prison. Even in the movies, people don't get away with it. But the more he talked about it, showing me his blueprints and plans, the more I realized he'd been thinking about this for a long, long time. And his idea was ingenious. If executed correctly, there would be a very good chance at safety and a clean getaway. And he had a man on the inside who had revealed to him the weaknesses in the casino's security systems. Still, I imagined there were plenty of factors he hadn't accounted for. "Yo, that's why I came to you," he said when I pointed that out. "You're the engineer in the family. How would you like to retire at 40, Brian? We'd be so rich, you'd never have to work another day in your life at that soul-crushing job you're always complaining about. Not only that, but this is our chance to make history." That part got to me. Don't ask me why. The whole thing felt like a challenge to my analytical mind, which I couldn't deny. The feat of surpassing a casino's security system would be talked about for decades, perhaps even centuries. Books would be written about it, movies would be made, and podcasts would explore the theories on how it was accomplished. "All right, I'm in," I finally told him after several days of consideration. "But if things start to go sideways, Just promise me you'll put a stop to this. I don't want to see either one of us in prison." He just smiled, saying that wasn't going to happen. And he was right. What ended up happening was much, much worse. While Blake worked to assemble a team, I set about doing my end of things. There were so many unknowns right from the start, but the gears in my head were turning, and I was already starting to think of solutions to our problems. As an engineer, that's what I do, and I'm damn good at it. Measurements needed to be taken, first of all, to get even the most basic layout and understanding of what we were going to be excavating. Otherwise, we might end up drilling through the floor of the security office instead of the casino vault. The problem was you couldn't just go into the casino with a tape measure and start taking notes. I had to get creative. One morning, after making a series of initial measurements, I painted a white line on my bicycle tire, then rode around the outside of the casino counting the revolutions on my wheel. By the end of the day, using these measurements and the information from Blake's man on the inside, we had our exact coordinates for the vault. Pretty clever, right? The next step was establishing a base camp and a drilling location. Blake helped me scout out nearby buildings that were for rent or lease, and we found one which was ideal in an old warehouse a few blocks away from the casino. Using a dummy corporation Blake had set up, we rented the place and began to dig. Little by little, I made my way into the nearby sewer system. From there, we'd make another hole, which would lead us into the vault. The sewers would act as our escape route, allowing us to evade police and pop up a few blocks away right beside the getaway vehicle. One morning, Blake told me he had finished assembling the crew. We got together at the rented building to discuss our plans and go over the operation. There was Gas, the street racer. He had a reputation for his flatulence, but also for fast driving, quick instincts, and he had a long resume as a getaway man. He could drift with the best of them and routinely won pink slips in late-night street races, acquiring cars which he then sold to upgrade his own ride. If he gave you a lift somewhere, though, it was bound to be a smelly journey. Our lockman was none other than Slim Fingers Pete, a notorious locksmith and safecracker. After learning to pick locks from his father growing up, Pete owned his own locksmith and vault-building business for 30 years. Eventually, though, he got tired of the low wages and rude customers and took up a life of crime. He began making a name for himself as a modern-day Robin Hood, stealing jewels, cash, and priceless artifacts from the various rich neighborhoods around town. But he dressed shabbily, and the rumor was he donated the stolen cash to charity. Who knew if that was really true, though? Lastly, we had our demolitions expert, C4 Cindy, as she was known around town, or as she preferred to be addressed, Cinders. After 2 tours of duty serving in the Special Forces, Cinders was tossed out for insubordination, given a dishonorable discharge and sent packing from the military. This resulted in a lifelong vendetta from that day forward with every authority figure, especially if they were U.S. military. Still, she mostly wore camouflage and had a bright pink buzz cut. Every crew needed a comedian to ease the tension, and Cinders took on that role from day one, although she needed reminding sometimes to keep things serious when it mattered. The 5 of us sat around a table in front of a large chalkboard as Blake began to lay out the plan. We were in our rented warehouse a few blocks away from the casino, on the main level away from the sewer smell which had taken over the basement, all thanks to my drilling. The stink was getting worse, though, and it was spreading to the main level now. I got a few glares from the other team members who knew what I was up to down there. Still, it was all a necessary part of the plan.
All right, eyes up front, everybody. Yeah, I know the smell is a distraction, but I'm going over the operation for the first time with all of you, so just listen and save your questions for the end.
Yes, teacher, Cinders said sarcastically, leaning forward and putting her chin in her hands like a precocious child.
Cinders, if you want to get to blow something up later, you better start taking this seriously.
I am, she pouted. But then after seeing his dead-set expression, she relaxed her posture, leaned back, and spoke in her grown-up voice.
Okay, fine, I'm listening.
Blake took a deep breath and steeled himself for the grand unveiling. I was the only one in the room who knew all the details, since he'd practiced this presentation with me the night before.
All right, listen up. Now, this plan is a bit complex, so bear with me. Gas, Your job is going to be the simplest. Monday at 0400 hours, you're going to be parked on the east side of Park Street, 6 blocks from the casino. Whatever vehicle you boost needs to be big enough to seat all 5 of us. Plus, we're going to need cargo space and room for the cash. So I'm thinking of something like a work van. Preferably discreet, white in color, no markings.
Great, so you want me to steal a boring, slow piece of shit? He muttered, grinning. Yeah, no problem.
Boring and slow means the cops probably aren't going to notice it. Make sure you steal some plates, too. Somebody who isn't going to notice they're missing.
This ain't my first rodeo, Blake. This shit goes without saying.
Yeah, just making sure. This one's going to come down to all the details. That's why I picked you guys. I know you're the best.
We all waited for him to continue, and he looked at the chalkboard and started to write things out and draw diagrams, expanding on the execution of the plan.
Pete, Cinders, and I will be down in the sewers. Brian will be up on street level with the police scanner, keeping an eye on the front of the casino, keeping in touch with our man on the inside. All of this will guarantee that if someone finds out what we're doing, we'll get plenty of notice so we can escape.
Everyone glared at me, hearing that I would be safely up on street level while they were down in the sewers getting their hands dirty.
Brian has been the one in the sewer drilling, doing all the hard work, all the dangerous shit up until now. So that's part of the reason why he gets to be on lookout duty. Which comes with its own risks as well. Anybody got a problem with that?
Blake, the undisputed leader of the group, looked around at the others, sensing the shift in the room. It would have been easy to read into it as nepotism, but the 3 of them softened a few seconds later, and Cinders smiled, laughing out loud.
Hell, no wonder you stink so bad, Brian. I feel sorry for you having to deal with gases, nasty shits down in the sewers.
That eased the tension, and everyone laughed.
Okay, settle down. Let's get through this, and then we can make fun of gas more afterwards. You can all tell me your concerns.
You got it, boss,
Cinders said, doing a sarcastic military salute.
So here's the part you're going to like, Cinders. You're going to blow a big-ass hole in the bottom of the vault. And we're going to use this ladder contraption devised by Brian to climb in.
I stood up to show them the prototype I'd designed, holding the nondescript cylinder in my hands. Okay, so one person will hold the remote while the other one throws this up through the hole. Once it's inside the vault, the person with the remote's going to hit the button to engage the stabilizer bar. Demonstrating how it worked, I hit a red button on the remote control and the thing expanded instantly, like a 2-ended lightsaber made of steel. It's kind of heavy, so just watch out it doesn't fall on you. It might take a few attempts to throw it up through the hole, but it's doable. I've tried it. Whoever wants to be the one making the throw will have plenty of time to practice, too.
My hands are as sure as they come, said Pete. I'll toss it up through the gap on the first go. Practice or no practice. Let's go with a bit of practice, just to be safe, guys, Blake said, continuing with the plan. Once we're all up in the vault, we'll only have a few minutes. Pete, you're going to go in first. You get started on the lockboxes. Cinders, you'll be doing the same on the other end of the vault using the control explosives. Whatever you do, you have to keep it quiet.
Aw, so no big booms,
she protested, stomping her feet on the floor a few times, going back to her childish alter ego.
No big booms. Only little miniature booms. Then you can blow up as much shit as you want afterwards. A couple $1,000,000 will buy you a lot of explosives. Trust me.
Cinders smiled, looking off wistfully.
Ooh, a whole private island. Just for me to blow up.
What if someone hears something and comes in to investigate? I asked, playing devil's advocate. Blake and I had gone over this before, so I knew he had a great plan. I just wanted to prove it to everybody else.
That's the best part. There's going to be a fire alarm test happening at the same time, so nobody's going to be able to hear anything through the thick steel door. And if they do, well, our guy on the inside will be in charge of the cameras, so he'll just tell them everything looks fine, not to be worried. A fake camera loop's going to be playing the whole time, so if anyone asks to see, you can show them.
What if that doesn't convince them?
Pete asked.
What happens if they insist they want to see inside for themselves?
Well, we got exactly 4 minutes to clear out. That's how long it takes to open the vault. And by then we'll be long gone, vanished in the maze of sewers beneath the casino.
Everyone nodded, and Blake continued telling us the plan, but it was all straightforward after that. We all realized it was going to be challenging, but manageable. And what we didn't know was that Blake wasn't telling us the whole plan. I didn't even know what he was up to as much as I thought I did. When the big day came, I was supposed to be sitting in front of the casino as the lookout man. But Blake came down with a stomach bug, and he looked pale as a ghost after throwing up all night. He was shaky and on the verge of passing out every time he stood up, but he insisted on going ahead with the operation. I did what any other big brother would do. I volunteered to switch places with him. You stay in the van, okay, Blake? I'm the only one who knows this plan as well as you do. And if you're going to insist on going through with this today, then I'm going to insist on you staying in the van and being the lookout. He reluctantly agreed, and that was how I ended up being the one down in the sewers, standing alongside Cinders and Pete. The three of us watched through our protective goggles as the ultra-bright white light burned a hole clean through the steel. Molten metal dripped down bright red, burning a hole in the cement by our feet. I took a step back. Cinders looked at me and laughed, the liquid steel splashing just inches away from her toes, reflecting red in her welding goggles.
Careful, Brian, she said, grinning. The floor is lava.
After a hole had been built through the steel, Cinders sprayed the blackened edges with foam to cool them down for our entrance. Then Pete took the steel contraption I designed and threw it up through the hole, with just enough gentle spin so that it turned sideways at the peak of his toss. Then I hit the red button on the remote control, engaging the anchors. A steel rod shot out of either end of the cylinder, locking the device in place. I hit another button, and the rope ladder, which was concealed inside, popped out, unraveling until it reached the floor. Nice throw, Pete, I said, clapping our locksmith on the back.
Hey, nice job yourself. That's one hell of a contraption. I might just need to borrow it for my next job.
Cinders began climbing the ladder, and I followed after her, into the sound of the ringing fire alarm. So far, the plan was going perfectly, and there was no sign of anyone having heard our entrance. After this, you might not need to do any more jobs, Pete. Once we got up into the vault, the three of us began to giggle softly like children in a toy store. There was a stack of cash at the center of the vault, far surpassing anything we could have imagined. There had to be tens of millions of dollars, if not more.
Forget the bloody lockboxes,
Pete said over the alarms.
This here's more than we need. Let's take it, get the hell out of here.
This is where things started getting weird. I agreed with Pete that the lockboxes weren't worth the trouble with a huge pile of cash sitting there. But Cinders didn't say anything. Instead, she went into a corner and started quietly pulling things out of her demolition bag.
What are you doing, Cinders? Help us load up the cash. Fuck the boxes.
She just ignored me, starting to set small explosives on a few of the lockbox doors. They were lined up on one wall like safety deposit boxes in a bank vault.
Cinders, we don't need to risk the explosions. We've got more than enough right here.
But she just kept ignoring me. Instead, she just attached some cable to the small explosives on the lockbox doors and unwound a spool of it, stepping away from them.
Let her work,
Blake said into my earpiece.
You get the money, let her do her thing.
Why? Why risk it when we... A small explosion went off, interrupting me, and the room filled with a small, hazy cloud of white smoke. I shot a look over my shoulder, furrowing my brow. It didn't make sense. Why were they taking chances when we had so much guaranteed cash? Unless they knew something I didn't. I didn't have time to stay distracted, so I kept piling money into the bags we brought, throwing them down into the sewers below. We were nearly half finished.
Shit, somebody heard that,
Blake said in my earpiece.
You guys gotta get out of there now. My guy can't stop them. They're coming in right now.
A noise came from the vault door like a large steel plate being turned.
Damn it, Cinders!
She was still ignoring me, pulling something out of the lockboxes. I filled one more bag and then told Pete to start heading down the ladder. We were leaving a lot of cash behind. I went over to Cinders and tapped her on the shoulder. You just screwed up this whole heist. What the hell were you thinking? I told you to leave the lockboxes alone. Instead of turning around, she just kept staring at the thing in her hand. A vial full of green liquid which she had extracted from the lockbox. I noticed a cut on Cinder's finger where a piece of broken glass had pierced her skin. And then I saw the green liquid dripping from her hand. The vial had cracked in the explosion, and
whatever was inside of it was now seeping into Cinder's bloodstream. Cinders? Are you okay? I think you should put that down. We don't know what it is. Much to my surprise, she actually listened to me. With her fingers shaking badly, she set the vial of diminishing green liquid back into the lockbox, and a little puddle began to form beneath it. I know what it is, Brian. I've known all along. That's the whole reason I agreed to this heist. Somebody paid me to extract that vial from the safe. The same person who paid your brother to set this all up. You really think he just happened to have a man on the inside? You think he just happened to get sick today? No. He was scared. Scared of this shit. He didn't want to die. This was all beginning to upset me. I could feel my blood boiling. What the hell are you talking about, Cinders? My brother would never set me up. Blake? Blake, tell her. There was a deep sigh in my earpiece as my brother hesitated. I'm sorry, Brian. It wasn't supposed to break. The vial was supposed to be sturdy enough to survive a natural disaster. This was never supposed to happen. The vault door was unlocking, and I realized we had wasted too much time. I began to hustle back towards the ladder, telling Cinders to leave the vial behind. When she turned around, I didn't like what I saw. Purple-black veins spread inwards from the periphery of her eyes. Her pupils were turning crimson as she opened her mouth, and drool began to pour out from her lower lip. She growled, making a low sound in her throat like a dog. Her eyes were fixed on me as I backed away. But then the vault door opened and all hell broke loose. A few security guards drew their pistols as they entered, fanning out and moving towards the two of us. I had my foot on the ladder and was about to climb down when the closest one persuaded me to stop. "Freeze! Don't move!" he yelled at me, his pistol pointed at my face. Without many other options, I raised my hands in submission. It looked as if our flawless plan had failed. The guard came over to me with handcuffs at the ready, but Cinders wasn't responding to the other guards as well as I was. "Hey, I said to get your hands up in the air, lady. I'm not going to ask you again." Suddenly she raced towards one of the men, growling and drooling as she ran. He screamed at her to stop, but she seemed not to hear, instead lunging at him like a rabid dog as he squeezed the trigger. No, get off me!" he howled as the gun discharged into the air over and over again, his shots wild and aimless. The bullets began to ricochet around the vault, one of them hitting the security guard closest to me. He dropped his gun, yelping in pain as he grabbed his shoulder. "What the hell, Dan?" he yelled, and then saw what was happening and raced over to assist the other two guards. Cinders quickly turned her attention to them, raking her nails across one guard's face, scratching his eyes and blinding him in one rapid motion. Then she swept her other hand across his face from the other direction, alternating hands and scratching at his face over and over again in a frenzied attack. By the end of it, he was in a shuddering heap on the floor, bleeding out. The guard who had been closest to me was the only one of the three left, and he started firing his gun at her without any further warning. Bullets hit Cinders square in the chest, in the ribcage, in the neck, and in her shoulder, but she made no response. Instead, she leapt up onto him like a tiger. Her teeth sunk into his neck, ripping out his throat in one quick bite. He pushed and clawed at her face desperately, gurgling as blood bubbled up from the wound, his skin turning paler. That was when I realized I hadn't been moving. I needed to get away or I would be next. I started climbing down the ladder, my eyes darting around the vault room as I went, taking a final look at the chaos. Just before the room disappeared from my view, I saw one of the dead security guard's eyes snap open, purple-black veins spreading inwards from the edges of his eyes, towards his crimson-red pupils. That was when I realized what that shit really was. The stuff in the vial.
was a fucking zombie virus. And we just released it into the wild. With startling speed, the guard rose to his feet and came running my way. I stumbled down the rope ladder 2 and 3 rungs at a time, too scared to move safely. My heart was pounding fast as my feet slipped and I slid down the rest of the way, landing badly on my ankle and rolling it. I cried out in pain, looking up at the hole to see if anyone was coming. Instead of climbing down, the security guard fell down through the blasted hole in the vault floor, landing on the cement sewer floor with a hard crack, his leg breaking clean in half. A bone was jutting out through one side in a sharp splinter. But this didn't stop him. He got up and began to lurch and hop towards me, dragging his splintered femur and clawing desperately at the air just in front of me as I backed away. I got to my feet and started running, the adrenaline numbing the pain of my hurt ankle, but not entirely. Each step was agony as I raced to catch up with Pete, who was already 100 yards down the tunnel. Eventually, he stopped and waited for me to catch up, sensing that I was injured.
What the hell happened back there? Where's Cinders?
He asked, looking wildly over my shoulder.
Run!
I screamed.
Forget Cinders, she's dead. They're all dead.
This only seemed to confuse him further, and he stayed where he was as I ran past him, grabbing his arm, yelling at him to keep moving.
What the hell are you talking about? She can't be dead. I just saw her. We can't just leave her in there.
Run! They're fucking zombies now. They're coming for us.
Are you fucked in the head?
I didn't bother arguing with him any further, since just then Cinders appeared out of the darkness behind him, racing toward us with her red and purple eyes ablaze with hunger. Spittle clung to her face and dribbled down her chin, her teeth snapping like a rabid dog as she ran like an Olympic sprinter straight at us. Several infected guards were behind her, trailing slowly compared to her speed. They were injured from her attacks and from their fall down the ladder, but she was healthy and full of inhuman speed thanks to whatever was in that vial. It was making her fast, and it was making her mean. Homicidal. I couldn't help but stare in terrified fascination as she leapt onto Pete and dove face first into his neck with her teeth snapping ferociously. Like a hungry, stray dog after cornering a rabbit. There was no mercy or remorse. Only terror and shrill screaming until the sounds of that cut off abruptly. Blood sprayed into the air and gushed from his wounds onto the concrete and down into the sewer water. I stood transfixed, watching as she tore him to pieces. Eventually, I snapped out of it and ran, leaving the bag's money behind, no longer caring about them at all, only wanting to get away. Only wanting to run as fast and far as possible from that place. The sounds of footsteps behind me grew louder as the ladder came into focus in the distance. I tried not to look back over my shoulder, knowing that would only waste precious seconds, but I couldn't help it. I glanced back to see Cinders was in pursuit, trailing behind me a ways, but gaining fast. I didn't stand a chance of making it up the ladder before she got to me. I realized that, but continued to run, too terrified to give up. "Duck!" I heard someone scream from up ahead, and I looked to see a dim light above the ladder where the manhole cover had been opened. Someone was standing in the sewers up ahead, aiming a gun in my direction. It was my brother, Blake. I kept running until I was close enough for him to get a proper shot off, then I ducked out of the way just as the explosion of his gun reverberated through the sewers. He shot Cinders again and again, each time hitting her square in the chest. And yet she kept coming. He shot her 3 more times, finally landing a shot on her right temple, stunning her. Cinders collapsed to the ground, a bleeding hole in the side of her head exposing her skull. I started running towards Blake again, and a moment later she was up on her feet, moving marginally slower now.
"Let's go!"
Blake screamed.
"Get up the ladder. Do you have it? Do you have the vial?"
I started climbing the ladder, shouting down at him.
"No, the vial broke. It's gone. Just forget about it. Let's get out of here."
Continuing up the ladder, I thought he was following me, but when I got to the top, I climbed out and looked down to see he was still in there. In the sewers, staring up at me.
"Blake, what are you doing? We gotta go. Get up here."
He let out a deep sigh, looking remorseful.
"I'm not going anywhere. This was the worst case scenario.
I can't just leave. I have to try to stop this somehow, Brian. You go. You get as far away from this city. Get as far away as you can. No matter what you do, just run. Don't look back. They'll be coming for you, but they'll be coming for me first.
What are you talking about, Blake? Get up here, please. I realized I was crying as I looked down at him in the darkness, my tears dripping down to land at his feet. He looked straight ahead again and began to fire his pistol, letting out a howling war cry. An instant later, an undead cinders dove into him and brought him to the ground. Gas had to get out of the van to put the manhole cover back on, sealing the scene beneath the ground. I wasn't able to tear my eyes away from what I was seeing down there, but I did hear the sounds of it, even through the manhole cover. The sounds of my brother dying will ring in my ears every night when I fall asleep. For the rest of my life, I'm sure. My younger brother is getting eaten by zombies, I thought to myself in amazement. And I always thought those things only existed in the movies and on TV. Leave it to mankind to get creative with chemical warfare. Gas dragged me to the van and drove away from there. He seemed to know what was happening, as if Blake had let him and Cinders in on the secret. I'll never forgive him for that for as long as I live. I don't think that will be very long, though. I don't think any of us have much time left. And I'm talking about humanity in general. A new virus is spreading in the sewers beneath Las Vegas. It's only a matter of time before it surfaces again. And when it does, it won't matter how far we run. It'll be coming for us all. Las Vegas was swarming with zombies ever since the apocalypse. As our helicopter swooped in low over the strip, I saw things had not improved in recent months. Hordes of decomposing ghouls were pressed up against each other in places, crowds of them defying the laws of nature as they shuffled aimlessly around the town. The rumor was that the party kicked off right here in Sin City, after the virus ravaged it like every other major metropolis on Earth. Nobody was brave or stupid enough to risk going in there again. At least, not until now. We had received reliable intel that the CEO of Proteon, the megacorporation responsible for the virus, had hidden an antidote inside the vault of the MGM Grand Casino. That made sense, since casino vaults tended to be far more secure than bank vaults, and the people who owned those places didn't ask questions, as long as clients paid their exorbitant fees. So it seemed possible that the intel was correct. And if it was, that meant a potential cure. Or at the very least a vaccine that we could replicate in our labs. There would be no more fear of zombie bites with a vaccine in circulation. We would essentially become immune, as long as our chemists could recreate the formula. The only problem was nobody could access the casino vault without going through a horde of zombies. And it's kinda hard to crack a safe under that sort of pressure, much less a high-tech casino vault. Ghouls were roaming the Las Vegas Strip in droves. They never rested and they never slept, just waiting for fresh meat to arrive, and instantly pouncing on anyone who set foot in their territory. Now we were about to invade their city, and none of us felt comfortable with that idea. One thing we did have going for us was the fact that our organization, International Ghoul Hunters Operation Roundtable, or Egor for short, had access to a few pilots who still knew how to fly a helicopter. This meant we had a way in and out, without having to fight our way through the city streets, which were overrun by undead. But we would need to be careful. And more than one of us could die during the operation. We were well aware of that. "We're coming in hot. I want everyone locked and loaded," announced the leader of the squad, Lieutenant Bream, hefting his M134 minigun into his lap. A trail of bullets was feeding into it from a coil on his back, which would allow him to fire approximately 2,000 rounds per minute if he so desired. I'd rigged up the mechanism myself. The huge casino building loomed large up ahead, amidst the smoldering rubble that had once been the Las Vegas Strip. I had been to the city once before, when the world was still alive, and it was strange to see the place at night now. The bright neon fluorescents which the town was so well known for were dim and lifeless, The billboards and casinos just dark silhouettes against a backdrop of desert and skies. Only the streets were alive and filled with raging throngs of sun-baked zombies. As our pilot touched down on the casino's roof, the group of us climbed out of the helicopter, proceeding in a tight formation towards the door which led into the stairwell. The chopper took off, leaving us alone to fight our way down towards the basement. All of the elevators would be out of commission, which meant we would be taking the stairs. And who knew what we would find during our descent? We made our way down, finding it mostly clear except for a few stragglers. This made sense. Zombies are lazy, and they tend to move downhill. Still, we knew our luck would run out very quickly, as the place would be packed on the lower levels. We'd been through scenarios like this before. We were the best of the best that Egor had to offer, and each of us had nerves of steel. At the front of the pack was our squad leader, Lieutenant Bream. Long before the zombie apocalypse, Bream had been deep in the shit. He'd served in Afghanistan and Iraq, then Ukraine and China, and all over the Western Hemisphere during the first few years of World War III. His greatest asset was his ability to come up with alternative plans on the fly, and that's what he did as we came face to face with a crowd of zombies just before the basement, where we needed to exit the stairwell. The horde of them raced up towards us in a mob which trailed down for several floors. My heart skipped a beat as I spun around and hurried back up to the main level. We were forced to flee from the confines of the stairwell and wound up on the zombie-infested casino floor. Dozens of zombies were in close proximity, running at full sprints toward us when they saw us, and Bream immediately began to let loose with his minigun, firing a barrage of bullets which killed every walker in sight, but also drew more out of hiding. He cut those ones down too, so that none of us had to fire a shot. At least, not yet. Next in line of command for our operation there was Cassie. She was the navigator for the mission and had her maps for the casino in her hands, tracing escape routes with her fingers. "This way," she told us, pointing towards another hallway leading out of the gaming area. The whole place was a wreck. Blackjack tables were flipped over and slot machines toppled. Dead bodies were everywhere, many of them still moving, amidst piles of looted chips and cash which littered the casino floor. A green sign mounted on the wall indicated there was another set of stairs, and we broke into a run. My weapons of choice were a pair of pistols. I raised them to zombie eye level and unleashed a hail of bullets which exploded the skulls of several ghouls nearby as we raced past. One managed to grab hold of my arm, raking its rotten fingernails across my flesh. Its open mouth was inches away from my neck when I felt a spray of cool blood land on my face. Cassie had incapacitated the zombie with her sword through its skull and was wiping the blade clean on her pants. She winked at me saucily as we rushed to catch up with the others, having momentarily fallen behind. Fred was the tank of our group, throwing zombies out of the way with his bare hands and hefting a razor-sharp double-sided axe, which he swung around his head. He was a 7-foot-tall mountain of muscle who could break down almost any door, and if he couldn't go through it, he'd go through the wall next to it instead. In typical Fred fashion, he broke down the locked door to the employee stairwell with his shoulder, and we found with great relief that it was empty. Since this was a staff entrance, it was less frequently used, and that was perfect for us. We bolted down to the lowest level with only a few dozen undead casino employees trying to eat our flesh along the way. Finally, after cutting down countless ghouls, we made it to the vault room. It was behind a series of locked doors, which was less than perfect, since we were still being trailed by a group of walkers from the gaming floor who had followed us through the broken door. Lamar, our technical expert, went to work on the first door, which had a numbered keypad beside it. He pried the faceplate off the panel, revealing wires underneath. He began stripping these quickly, his face beading with sweat as the rest of us fought off a fresh group of undead in the narrow corridor. Our ammunition was almost depleted, so we resorted to using other weapons instead. I took out my katana and Bream produced a collapsible spear, thrusting it into the onslaught of attackers. After several harrowing minutes, I heard a click from behind me, and turned around as another group of zombies came around the corner. "I'm in," Lamar yelled a second later. We all followed him inside and locked the door behind us, just as the rotted corpses began to jiggle the handle from outside. This hallway was empty, thankfully, but there was still a smell pervading the place. Not the typical dead body smell we were used to either. This was something else. The group of us continued up the short hallway towards another thick steel door. Past that was the vault, and we would finally be at our goal. Surprisingly, this next door opened easily, as if unlocked. Lamar made a soft whistling sound as he pushed it open, looking inside.
What in the name of...
We readied our weapons as he trailed off.
At least it's not walkers. Come on, you guys gotta see this.
We entered the antechamber of the vault, seeing that the huge safe door was open. It looked as if something terrible had happened here inside this room. There was blood everywhere. The interior of the vault was blackened from an explosion. Multiple explosions by the look of it. And there was a huge hole in the floor where it looked as if a bomb had gone off.
What the hell is all this?
Bream muttered, walking into the vault. Piles of cash were still sitting at its center. Once upon a time, that cash would have meant a lot to me. But now it just looked like green, useless paper.
Is it possible someone beat us to the punch?
Cassie asked, looking at Bream.
Maybe it's true what they say. Maybe this is really where it all started.
I have a growing suspicion that's right. But if they kept the virus here, maybe they kept the antidote in here too.
Lamar took a hesitant step backwards, hearing that the original virus could have been stored in this room.
Do you think it's safe?
Bream thought about this for a second before shaking his head.
I don't know. It might not be.
The group of us stood there silently for a few seconds, considering our options.
Screw it,
Cassie said finally, throwing up her hands.
We came this far. I'm going in. If I turn into a walker, shoot me in the back of the head, will you?
Wait, hold on,
Fred yelled, hurrying after her. The two of them entered the vault and began to look around. Fred zoned in on one section where a bomb had blown the doors off several lockboxes.
What's this green shit?
He mumbled, pulling his hand back after touching one of them. Careful, Fred! I yelled, alarm bells ringing in my head.
There's a vial here. This could be it. Maybe it's the antidote.
Ah!
Damn broken glass.
A sound from behind us caught my attention, and I looked back over my shoulder in surprise to see the door collapsing inwards from where we'd entered. Dozens of zombies pressed up against one another, forcing themselves through the door, their rotten skin bulging and sloughing away where it met resistance.
We've got company,
yelled Bream, wheeling around and beginning to thrust his spear into the eye sockets of the advancing horde. My katana made short work of a tall, lumbering walker with a horse-like face. His large buck teeth appeared capable of devastating damage until his head hit the floor.
Fred, no! Stop!
I heard Cassie screaming from the vault and turned to look just in time to see Fred take her head between his hands and pull it off from her shoulders like a bully removing a Barbie head. A fountain of blood erupted from her neck as her body collapsed backwards, and Fred took a large bite from her face like an apple. His eyes were clouded with purple veins reflecting red light back at me.
Shit, Fred's infected,
Lamar began saying. Then his words were cut short and devolved into a bubbling gurgle as a walker tore out his throat with his yellow teeth. He clutched the wound as his skin turned paler, falling to the ground.
Shit, looks like it's just you and me, kid,
Bream said, his eyes darting around at the encroaching horde. You think we stand a chance? I asked, noting the fear in his eyes. I had never seen Lieutenant Bream scared. He just shook his head as he raised his spear.
Nope, but let's take as many of them to hell with us as we can. Sound like a plan?
I nodded, and as I did, something caught my attention out of the corner of my eye. A glint of shiny chrome within the vault, in the center of that blackened hole in the floor. For some reason, I thought I saw something dangling from it, like a rope ladder leading down. Hang on, boss. We might not have to cash in our chips just yet. Bream looked at me, thrusting his spear into the face of a nearby zombie, without any effort. I grabbed his arm and pulled him into the vault, where zombie Fred was now moaning and shuffling toward us, his arms outstretched.
Rrrr,
he groaned, a guttural sound escaping from his blood-stained lips. I got him, I said, sidestepping his slowly reaching hands and leaping into the air to slice his face in half. The top part of his skull slid away like an anime cartoon, dropping to the floor with a wet, meaty plop. Blood sprayed everywhere, jetting from his arteries. I neared the hole in the floor, seeing that there was indeed a rope ladder leading down into the sewers. That was where that shitty smell was coming from, I realized.
Holy hell, good job, kid,
Bream said, seeing the hole.
Get down that ladder, I'll hold him off.
He thrust his spear out at the approaching zombie horde with pinpoint strikes, like a Spartan warrior perfectly weaponized for the purposes of destruction. I looked down at the rope ladder and began to climb into the sewers below, trying to breathe through my mouth to avoid the smell, but that was impossible. My feet landed in ankle-deep water, and I looked around in the darkness, hearing the grunts of effort from Bream up above me in the vault. A second later, he was climbing down too, and I waited for him before beginning to move deeper into the darkness. I heard his feet splash down into the puddles, and we started running through the sewers, deeper into the black abyss, hoping it was safe but not knowing for sure. Zombies were climbing down after us, falling into the sewer from the vault. We heard them pursuing us a second later. The two of us arrived at an intersection where 4 tunnels came together, and we looked around trying to decide which way to go. A sound of movement came from ahead to the right, and then a foot splashed in the water to my left. From ahead came more noises, grunting and groaning and the sounds of shuffling feet in the sewage. As my eyes finally adjusted to the darkness, I saw we were surrounded. Hundreds of red eyes reflected the dim light all around us. Bream let out a deep sigh from beside me. "Okay, now we're gonna die," he said simply. "Here, let me help you out." His spear came through my jaw a second later, and I felt an instant of pain before it went through my skull, killing me instantly. In death, I can't help but feel a deep gratitude. I only wish I could have returned the favor. At first, when the dead began to rise, there was panic, mayhem. Everything we had seen in movies and television, it all came to pass. All governments were wiped out. Every world leader killed and reanimated. The systems and structures that we had all come to rely on were revealed for the thin, fragile glass tower that it all was. And it shattered into a million pieces and collapsed. It was total anarchy, at least for a little while. Small groups of survivors, such as myself, roamed the countryside for months, looking for shelter, setting up camps. That was how it started in the beginning. Hunter-gatherer types. We traveled around trying to find a place to call home for a little while, until the hordes of zombies began to form and cluster together, wiping out everything in their path. Then we'd move on. But after a while, structures began to form. Systems. Organization from the chaos. Evenness from the entropy. I was within that elite group of disciplined warrior survivors from the very beginning. Those of us who decided to make change for the better. And to set up something to replace the nothing that currently existed. That was how Egor was formed. International Ghoul Hunters. Operation Roundtable. By that point, we had a few pilots who could take us around and bring us all together for face-to-face meetings when we had to. We had also managed to set up a rudimentary internet again that we could all use for the purposes of communication. It wasn't near to as good as the original, of course, more akin to a BBS platform from the 90s, but it was something. The Roundtable, as we called it at first, was a loose organization of leaders from various nations who wanted to work collaboratively together to bring the world back to normal, and to deal with the superiors. The superiors were what we called the zombies who had started to evolve. They terrified all of us more than anything we'd ever seen, and we knew that if we didn't take them out, they would destroy us all. Every bit of progress we had made would be undone. Of course, every round table needs an Arthur, and we had one. Perhaps that was the reason why we named the organization what we did. I honestly don't remember, but it was him who brought us all together. Who knows if that was his real name or not, but it was all I ever knew him as. Of course, he was British to boot. I'm Canadian myself. We had Americans as well. Germans, French, Brazilian, Koreans, Australians, South Africans, and representatives from a dozen other countries. It was a big table. Arthur had agents planted all over the world, and I was one of them. We rooted out the superiors and reported back to him with our findings. Then he would send backup as necessary to take them out before they could build up too big of an army. Oh yeah, did I mention the superiors could telekinetically control entire hordes of zombies? Because that's the whole problem with them. You can't have people like that around in the zombie apocalypse, you just can't. It's not a good idea to let folks like that hang around. They're nothing but trouble. The guy I'm about to tell you about was no exception. It was a typical reconnaissance mission for us at first. We were in the downtown core of Toronto, the burnt-out husks of towering buildings all around us. The city of a few million people was a hollow shell of its former self. No one would have dared go into the city at the beginning, but now it was a different story. The undead ghouls who had taken over were few and far between after years of hard times, and we could take care of them handily enough. At least so we thought. Want to check out the old Rogers Center? Someone asked. I think it might have been Cassie, or then again it could have been Stella. It doesn't matter, it was no one's fault. Sure, I said. If it had been a busier day, I would have said no. I was the leader after all, but it was quiet. We had barely run into any undead since that morning. It was like they were all hiding out somewhere. And I miss going to see the Blue Jays, even if they never did win another one without Joe Carter. We walked up the long staircase off of Front Street, making our way towards the stadium. I had an image in my mind of going out onto the field, picking up a bat, and hitting a ball with it. I imagined it sailing into the outfield, a major league home run. Usually I was so mission-focused, but I was goofing off that day. Maybe I was just tired of the grind. Maybe it was something else. The glass doors were all smashed out, making it easy to get inside. There were a couple zombies milling around the foyer, but we made quick work of them. Cassie drove her katana blade through an eyeball. Frank caved in a skull with his sledgehammer, while Tom stood back, watching out for an unexpected ambush, ready to intervene with his crossbow if necessary. The security gates had been destroyed by looters, and we slipped past them easily. We made our way towards the playing field, and I was overwhelmed by nostalgia. Memories of going to see baseball games with my wife, my family, my friends. It all came flooding back. My knees actually buckled from the emotion of it all. I remembered again that they were dead. Every last one of them. I would never see any of them again. I would never watch another baseball game. There would be no more picnics, no more beach outings, no more family dinners. For any of us. What the hell was the point of it all? My team must have sensed my sudden melancholy because they stopped with me and actually said a few sympathetic words. Hey man, are you okay? Frank asked. Give him a minute, he's dealing with something. We've all got shit from our past that comes back sometimes. I shook my head, trying to get rid of the thoughts. Wasn't easy. Let's go play some ball, I said, trying to smile and feeling it stretch fake across my face like a too thin coat of paint, attempting to conceal a worn and splintering facade. Frank wasn't buying it, but was nice enough not to say anything. He put his meaty arm around me, and the five of us went down the aisle towards the playing field. Tom was quiet as usual, keeping an eye out behind us for anyone looking to sneak up on us. Surprisingly enough, the dugout still contained a few baseball bats and balls, even a couple of gloves. It looked like the players had cleared out in a hurry and no one had come back since. We went out onto the field, taking our impromptu positions, and I saw nervous looks on everyone's faces. It had been so quiet lately, but we knew things could change fast. Still, we thought we could handle anything. Frank threw a pitch at the strike zone. It was a lob, and I managed to give it a good crack on the first swing. The ball went sailing into the air and towards left field. Cassie ran for it and grabbed it, throwing it back into the infield. Stella was playing catcher behind home plate, while Tom stood off to the side of the field in the stands, looking around, waiting for trouble. "Come on, Tom," I yelled. "It's no fun without another batter. If you come down, you can take the swing next." I actually thought he would say no. Tom was always the one who stayed off to the side, while the rest of us had these brief moments of fun. The stoic bastard never wanted any part of it. But he surprised me and he came down to the field actually grinning for once. I handed him the bat and he stood at the plate waiting for the next pitch. The huge, empty Major League Baseball stadium was hauntingly quiet, our every movement echoing across the vast space around us. Frank threw the ball a couple more times before Tom managed to get a hit. The ball went far into center field and Cassie went running for it. Tom made a dash for first base and then for second. Frank was out there yelling for Cassie to throw it into him at any second, saying they would get him out there. That was when I saw them. I was speechless for a moment, and the ball almost hit me in the head when someone threw it into home plate after an error. They'd all been focused on the play and didn't see what was happening all around us. At all of the entrances all around the field, undead were filtering in like patrons just before a big game was about to start. They were coming down the aisles toward us from every direction. It took a minute for others to notice. I was too dumbstruck to say anything. Our game stopped entirely when they saw me looking and noticed our dilemma. Everyone dropped their baseball mitts and ran for their weapons. But we knew it was hopeless. We knew we were doomed. There was clearly a superior here in the stadium with us. He was commanding the undead that were surrounding us on all sides. That was the only way they could be so organized. The undead wandered onto the field lazily without haste, only revealing their surprising hunger as they came close enough to smell the warmth of our sweat. When they appeared suddenly ravenous, opening their mouths wide and snapping at us with unnatural speed. The ghouls went after poor Frank the worst. He was a huge man, about 6'10". The superior probably saw him and commanded them to go after him first. He swung his sledgehammer around in a giant arc, obliterating several zombies' heads with one fell swoop. But there was a wolf among them. Wolves are what we call the fast ones. The ones who act slow at first, but then attack with stunning speed and ingenuity. They're not superiors, but they're close. Ever hear the expression, like a wolf in sheep's clothing? That's why we call them that, because you think they're normal ghouls, brainless, but then they surprise you and tear your throat out with their bare hands and their teeth. The wolf jumped on Frank while his back was turned, swinging his hammer in a great arc around him. It landed on his back and began to tear at the muscles of his neck, ripping them apart with its teeth while he screamed. As I was distracted by that, 4 zombies surrounded me, and I had to sidestep quickly to prevent myself from getting devoured. I quickly swung the black bat I was carrying and caught one upside the head, causing him to stagger backwards. He regained his balance almost instantly and came towards me again. While I was momentarily focused on that, the other 3 came at me, as well as 6 more. We were quickly being outnumbered, and hundreds more were swarming in by the second. They were storming the field like an angry mob. Only this mob was intent on eating our flesh. The smell of them was horrifying, and the terror I felt was overwhelming. All I could see was rotten faces all around me, black teeth and eyeballs oozing pus. Their skin was gray and decaying, with gaps and tears showing exposed muscle and bone beneath. And the noise of them all. Moaning and gurgling while they attacked us with a complete lack of emotion or self-awareness. I saw Cassie go down and her sword went flying into the air and landed near me. Hurrying over to her, I picked it up off the ground. Knowing how much it meant to her, I wanted to keep it safe, even if it was only as a tribute to her. Her terrified and desperate screams rang out hollow across the field. That was when I vowed I would get her out of there one way or another. The wolf zombie came running towards me and launched itself into the air. I drove the sword point into his eye as he did, and the momentum carried his head right through the steel, destroying his brain and bringing his face an inch away from mine. At that moment, I realized all of my friends were dead. The horde was zeroing in on me with no one else to focus their efforts on. Big Frank, the tank, stood tall among them, his eyes now red and full of hunger and hate. Cassie stood up next and stalked toward me, joining the crowd of undead as they approached. They attacked me without mercy, my friends and foes alike, as if we had never known each other. And I fought like I'd never fought before. And let me tell you, I'm known for my ability to get out of situations even as completely far gone as this one. I slashed off zombie faces with a katana, cutting heads off while spinning like a dervish and somersaulting through the air. I parried and thrusted, hacked and slashed, dove through legs and climbed atop the crowd's shoulders, severing heads and bouncing upon the ones that stood there jam-packed together, using them as planks to springboard to and fro as I did my dirty work. Necrotic hands grasping at my legs all the while, tearing long and ragged gashes from my flesh, breaking off fingernails that remained lodged inside me. And eventually the corpses were staggeringly high. The pile nearly filled the baseball field. But even I had my limits. My arms were filled with blood, heavy and clumsy after hours of defending myself from a never-ending onslaught of undead. One of them was cunning and quick. A wolf, probably. I thought I had them all beat, but he grabbed me and took me down, and that was it. I was finished, I assumed, as the crowd of those remaining came at me and descended upon me with salivating mouths and hungry eyes, their teeth bared and hands outstretched like greedy infants reaching for a teat. But the superior had other plans. He floated in through the air, descending among the crowd of them, just as they were about to consume my flesh. "You I will keep alive," he said. "You are strong, and I like strong people by my side. I will keep you as my scribe. You will write what will become the new history books. You will tell of my conquests, making it known for generations after that it was I who created this new world." Thanks? I wasn't really happy with the new arrangement he was imposing, but then again, I wasn't really in a position to argue. Does that mean they aren't going to eat my brains? Precisely. We can't have the new scribe stumbling around, drooling all over the scrolls as he writes the history books, can we? I was silently relieved. He noticed that and made a little tisk-tisk noise. "Oh, I didn't mean for you to get too excited. I said they couldn't eat your brains. I didn't say anything about the rest of you." The undead looked at me with hungry eyes once again, now having obtained permission to enjoy a meal, albeit within a limited menu. "Only his lower extremities, please. We'll need those hands of his to write with. We wouldn't want that juicy brain to go to waste, now would we?" The pack of them closest to me began to strip flesh from my body with their bare hands as I screamed. They drooled and slobbered as they feasted on my legs and feet until there was nothing left of them. The pain was unimaginable, the suffering, well, that's pointless to talk about now. I have a new kind of suffering to deal with at this point in my life. Now I get to write about the new world as it is created. A horror playland for a demented psychopath who enjoys nothing more than torment and suffering. He controls them all now, the whole lot of them. I get dragged around like this publicist, putting out press releases that nobody can read but him and me. And I'm starting to get the feeling he's pretty much illiterate. I sure hope Egor is still out there somewhere. If not, I'm really screwed. International Ghoul Hunters, Operation Roundtable, was a long-winded name for our attempt to restructure society after its collapse. We shortened it to Egor, and have referred to it as such ever since. The zombie apocalypse happened nearly a decade ago, and I'm old enough to remember the shock and ensuing mayhem experienced by the general populace when we saw that TV shows and movies had gotten it right all along. Go for the head was the word that got out. That was the only way to kill the bastards, destroy the brain, or at least what was left of it. Methods of infection were disputed at first, some saying even being touched by a zombie was enough to become infected by the virus. Some thought it was airborne. Others believed it was only spread through a bite. People who died of natural causes stayed dead, at least. The only ones who rose again were the people who were bit by Ghoul, we realized after some time. There didn't seem to be any chance of infection through scratches or aerosols, which was a relief. That meant we had a chance of getting things back under control one day, if we could only thin out their numbers. Egor came into being a few years ago, and has grown tremendously since then. We have a good chance now at taking back the world for humanity and snatching it back from the grasp of the dead. An attempt at global government that had enough local clout and manpower to effect change across the planet. We created a global communication network, and even have a small navy and air force. It's not much, but it's a start. And like I say, we keep growing every day. The problem, though, is the superiors. If it weren't for them, we'd have the world back to normal, almost. But the superiors are dangerous and deadly, able to control entire hordes of zombies telepathically. And they've been taking out our people one by one, systematically destroying our new shadow government and replacing it with their own. One superior in particular has amassed a huge army of undead. We've come to calling him Lucifer, as he's risen to the heights of evil power unlike anything we've ever seen before. He's like the Antichrist, raising up an army of the dead to replace the living. He started out in northern Ontario, Canada. The cold weather froze many of the zombies in the winter months, keeping them fresher, stronger. Somehow he amassed the largest horde ever seen from what was left in the colder regions, and then began to move towards the south and towards Toronto, where he set up his headquarters, right on the top of the CN Tower. For those who don't know, that was once the tallest building in the world. It's still near the top of the record books, especially after several of its competitors burned down or collapsed following the looting and rioting post-apocalypse. Lucifer lives at the top of this giant tower and rules supreme over the hundreds of thousands of undead who roam the streets below him. From there, he can survey them all and send them forth against any threats that approach, using only his thoughts. Our man is still inside, so we don't want to blow the place up. We think he knows that. Maybe that's why he's keeping him there. The rest of the team is dead. Frank, Cassie, Stella, Tom. He only kept the leader. General Reed, my once proud mentor. Now a tortured captive, only half the man he used to be. Literally, not figuratively, since the zombies ate his legs. Mentally, he's all there. We can tell this based on his writings. He's not reporting to us directly, but it seems he's still managing to sneak out the occasional hidden code within his writings. It appears that Lucifer has made General Reed into his publicist. The guy was always a great writer. He did our meeting minutes, and whenever we needed a memo for some big picture idea typed up, he was always the one we asked to do it. So it doesn't surprise me that Lucifer enlisted him to write up these press releases for no discernible reason, which he leaves scattered everywhere. Here's a brief excerpt from one. Greetings! All hail our supreme leader, the Nameless One. He will carry us forth into the future with his brave and fierce lamentations. Make way for his greatness. Pfft, yeah, okay. What else is new? The groan of the day today is... And here's a joke to brighten up this cloudy morning. Did you hear about the guy who's addicted to drinking brake fluid? He says he can stop anytime he wants. You get the basic idea. Just a community newsletter, more or less. Except nobody can read it but us and him. And I don't mean Lucifer. Judging by his lack of awareness that he is being openly mocked in the majority of these press releases, I would say he has a cursory understanding of the English language at best. Which brings me to how we ended up being tipped off when and where to strike. In one particular press release, General Reed filled us in on the fact that Lucifer really likes to sleep in on Sundays. He always stays up late the night before for Decapitated Head Bowling League every Tuesday and Saturday night. Thus, we had an opening for our attack. The plan was to come in by chopper and descend to the observation deck of the CN Tower. We would have to blast our way in, then rappel inside. It was the only way since there were a few 100,000 zombies downstairs. Hovering over the tall building, we dropped down from the helicopters on our ropes. I only hoped the sound of rotor blades hadn't woken the bastard up. Controlling my descent, I slowly dropped down to the window on the south side of the building. The observation deck had a ledge on the exterior, so I was able to stand on that easily and get prepared. I gave the hand signal to Reggie on my left, then to Sam on my right. We placed the explosive charges on the plexiglass, knowing it was thick and wouldn't break easily. My thumb went up into the air to indicate I was ready, and they pulled me back up towards the chopper. Once we were clear of the blast, I hit the detonation button. The explosion was deafening, despite my attempts to cover my ears with my hands at the last second. The intended effect was achieved, though, and we saw movement inside the building. We had our way in now. But now they knew we were coming. I gave the hand signal to the team, and we dropped down once again from our safe height near the choppers. As the roller clamp slid down and I got closer and closer to the building's observation deck once again, my heart began to hammer wildly in my chest. Despite my efforts at controlling it, I knew I might die there. We had never faced anyone so unpredictable. So deadly. My feet hit the steel grate floor of the observation deck and I saw zombies milling about inside the building. We just had to hope that he hadn't made it to the elevator yet. The blueprints showed it was not far away from where he slept. I jumped through the open window and felt the air whipping around inside the place with tremendous force. It was a windy night, and at this height the gales were powerful enough to knock a man off his feet. A zombie lurched out of the shadows towards me, and I spun around just in time. It was a fast one. A wolf. I managed to knock his chin with the butt of my rifle, but it did very little to disable the monster. His rotten teeth snapped the open air just inches from my face. His decaying skin had large sections missing, which exposed muscle, bone, and subcutaneous tissue beneath. I could see his jaw snapping shut through a large hole in his cheek. Reggie came up behind him as the bastard took me to the ground with his wild and unpredictable attacks. We all tried to watch each other's backs, and Reggie was a consummate professional. He made quick work of the wolf with a thrust of his long, tactical knife through the brainstem of the ghoul. General Reed began to call out from his location. We heard him and moved in that direction. Lucifer would conceivably want to use him as a human shield, so it was a safe bet they would be together. Either that or the bastard was already gone. We didn't think he would leave without a scribe and bargaining chip. Without General Reed as a deterrent, we'd have napalmed his ass long ago. A few had suggested doing that regardless, but were eventually outvoted by the rest of the Roundtable. Arthur would have never allowed it. and he had the ultimate say with his veto power. Broken glass crunched beneath my feet as I moved towards the sound of Reed's calls for help. The man sounded much different now, like he was weak and in ill health. His strong voice now sounded tired and haggard. "Look out!" I heard Miller call out too late, and turned to see Reggie being assaulted from all angles. The entire floor was full of wolf zombies, I realized too late. They were Lucifer's elite bodyguards. These mutated ghouls were capable of inhuman speed, and their reflexes were off the charts. Worse yet, they were sneaky. They could blend into the shadows and lie in wait for hours or days if they wanted to. Not to mention their ability to mimic normal dullard zombie behavior, so you didn't realize what you were dealing with until it was too late, and they were already pulling out your windpipe with their teeth. Reggie was currently having that exact thing done to him. They pulled out his trachea and esophagus and gnawed on them as he gurgled and made silent screams. I took out my sidearm, shot one in the head. The other looked up at me with his face covered in gore, and he smiled intelligently. The next bullet took at his eye, and he fell over, dead for good. Suddenly, all the shadowy corners inside the CN Tower observation deck looked like potential hiding places for ghouls. They were anywhere and everywhere, as far as we could tell. I made a hand signal to the other members of the team, and we made a tight formation, watching each other's backs. We began to move towards the general direction of General Reed once again. His calls for help were silent now, and I worried we had missed our chance. For all we knew, they'd snuck onto the elevator and were now down on the ground floor, escaping the place. I kicked in the door to the room where I believed his calls had come from. But it was clearly not the right room. Ghouls were packed inside, shoulder to shoulder, filling the crowded room with a horrifying smell. As soon as they saw me, they lunged forward, reaching out their decaying hands towards me. As I screamed and stumbled backwards, they began to pour out of the room. There was no chance of containing them. They were soon everywhere. I began to fire my assault rifle, taking measured single shots, trying to remember my training, trying not to panic. It helped that I'd been in the ship before. Worse than this, if you can imagine that. But there were dozens of them. They quickly overwhelmed my team and took them out one by one, despite their efforts to fight back. Pretty soon it was just me and a handful of zombies, lurching towards me as I picked them off with careful shots to the head. When the last one hit the ground, I figured it was time to try another door. There were only so many options. General Reed had to be behind one of them, but Lucifer was probably hiding in there too. I hadn't heard the elevator door opening, I realized, which meant that he was most likely still up here. The next door I kicked in was the right one. I saw General Reed laying on the floor, a cold look in his eyes. His entire lower half was gone, and the rest of him looked thin and pale. He was shaking his head and looking at me, saying, "Why did you come here? You shouldn't have come here." I stepped into the room, and his eyes widened. Turning around, I saw the blade of a long sword swish just past my face. It took off the end of my nose, but I didn't feel that until later. The adrenaline took over as Lucifer regained his balance and began to take a backswing with the blade. It looked heavy and ornate, and completely impractical. When he swung it threw him off balance once again, and I took my opportunity as I sidestepped out of the path of danger. He howled with rage and anger as I took hold of the hilt of the sword, attempting to wrestle it from his grasp. He was strong, but I was stronger, and began to overpower him. That was when he bit me. It was a move made out of pure desperation, and I could tell by the look on his face that he was afraid of what the consequences of this action might be. No one had ever been bit by a superior before, until that moment. I felt the power surging through me, and although I didn't understand it at the time, my life in that moment would be changed forever. I kicked him away from me as I pulled the blade out of his hands. The flesh of my neck where his teeth were tearing it apart came loose, and I swore in anger and horrified pain. The blood which poured forth from the wound was now black and tarry, and didn't look like something which would come from a human being. I realized that was because I no longer was one. Now I was something completely different. Now I was a superior. My heart was no longer beating, I noticed. My skin felt cold and clammy. The elevator made a loud ding, and I heard the door open just outside the room we were in. I gave the superior another good kick to the chest and shoved him out of the door, just as a dozen more zombies came around the corner. "Eat him," I shouted at them, wanting to test my new powers. They engulfed him and began to tear apart his clothing and then his flesh as he screamed and howled in pain and terror. "Go out the window and take him with you," I shouted at them next. My new undead servants complied and took the bastard down to the ground floor with them, pulling him out the window as he screamed in bloody agony. Lucifer was no more. By the time they hit the ground, they would all be liquefied human remains. Zombie smoothies. "What's your status, team leader?" The voice of the helicopter pilot demanded through my radio. "Packages in hand," I said back, clipping a rope to General Reed's belt. "Thank you," he said weakly. "Don't thank me until we're home free, okay? You'll jinx this flawless mission, which has gone off without a hitch. So just keep your trap shut for now, alright?" I threw him over my shoulder and carried him out to the window. Stepping out onto the observation deck, from there I made a call with the radio. We were going home. And now, we had a chance at fighting back.
The story you just heard was written by me, and a variation of it previously featured on the Dr. Nosleep Podcast and YouTube channel. If you'd like to check out their channel for more content, please check out the description below. Become a channel member today for early access, bonus videos, and special emojis only available to members. Check out the description below or click the join button for more info. If you'd like another way to help support the channel, please consider joining my Patreon page at patreon.com/Jordan Group Horror. As a patron, you'll get access to bonus videos and content. You'll be credited at the end of every video going forward. And if you decide to stay for 3 months, I'll name a character after you, which will be featured in a Hollow's End story. Links to join the Patreon are in the description. Thanks everyone for listening. Please like, subscribe, and comment to help the channel continue to grow. And see you again next time at 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hope you have a great night.